Irma Grese. There are few female concentration camp guards of World War II whose stare is as haunting as Irma Grese's. After her arrest, what struck her captors was her age, and she gained the nickname the Beautiful Beast, and she was in her early 20s when she worked inside the concentration camps. Born in 1923, Irma had a complex relationship with her family. Her mother died at a young age by her own hand, and her father was a staunch anti-Nazi, and he hated the fact that Irma was beginning to run with the Nazi youth groups such as the League of German Maidens. Eventually her father kicked her out of the family home, but after a number of attempts, Irma Grese was accepted to train as a concentration camp guard at the camp of Ravensbrück, an all-female site, which was seen as a training centre for women. She had previously worked inside of a hospital with some of the most sadistic SS doctors who would later conduct human experiments within the camps. Whilst training at Ravensbrück, Grese was reprimanded strongly by the more senior guards, as she actually apologised for standing on the foot of a prisoner. She was taught how to become a beast, and someone who ruthlessly inflicted violence onto other inmates. Grese remained at Ravensbrück until March 1943, and she was then sent on to Auschwitz to Birkenau. Auschwitz in Poland was undergoing a huge expansion, and the creation of the women's camp inside of the Birkenau complex was opened, which required more female staff to work. The Commandant Rudolf Höss cherry-picked only the most brutal women to work there, and Grese initially worked as a telephone operator. But she then oversaw the punishment details, those inmates who were being punished for committing infractions of the camp's rules. Whilst at Auschwitz, Grese became infamous for her violence and crimes. She was seen using her whip and pistol to beat inmates who committed small rule breaks, and it was said by one prisoner that the women had learned to dread the penalty of her attentions, the least of which meant a whiplash. Grese was a very vain woman, and she thought she was a movie star inside of Auschwitz, and dreamt of a career in the films, but she continued to demonstrate terror. She was a complete sadist though, and seemed to get some gratification from seeing horrific things. She witnessed a doctor carrying out an operation, and it was stated of her that, "I happened to look up and encountered the most horrible sight I have ever seen, the memory of which will haunt me for the rest of my life." Irma Grese was enjoying the sight of this human suffering. Her tense body swung back and forth in a revealing, rhythmical motion. Her cheeks were flushed, and her wide-open eyes had gone rigid. She seemed to have some perversion for this sort of suffering. Grese was also involved in patrolling around Auschwitz with 1 or 2 huge dogs, and she encouraged these animals to attack the prisoners and even kill. One prisoner said, "The dogs were tearing at the girl's body. Irma came closer to observe what they were doing. Her eyes were bloodshot. The sight of the blood seemed to intoxicate her." She was a deviant and had affairs with many other SS officers, including allegedly SS Doctor, the Angel of Death Josef Mengele, and Josef Kramer, the Commandant of Birkenau. Irma Grese also actively participated in the selections in the camp, where many inmates who arrived were instantly sent to the gas chambers. She personally selected those who were to be sent to the chambers and their deaths immediately. Irma Grese truly was horrific, and she was later sent on to Bergen-Belsen, another camp where she was captured at the end of the war. The British had heard about her reputation, and they brought her to trial, and she was executed at the age of 22 inside of Hamlin prison. Jenny Wanda Bachmann. Known as the Beautiful Spectre, or more simply Mad Jenny, Jenny Wanda Bachmann was a woman whose nickname was accurate. Some described her as beautiful or pleasing to the eye, but behind the appearance, she was a wicked woman. Born in 1922, she had an early career as a model, and specifically worked inside of the fashion industry. But to pursue a better paid job and career, she volunteered with the SS to work as a female guard inside the concentration camps. She had a short stint training, and was then sent on to Stutthof, a large site in Gdansk. She was in her early 20s at the time, and she was known for being inhumane and cruel to the prisoners. She later claimed she tried to treat all prisoners well, but many of her inmates told the truth about what she had done. She beat and struck prisoners with her truncheon and other weapons, to the point where the prisoners were beaten to death by her. She often was seen laughing whilst inflicting this cruelty. She also selected people to be sent into the small gas chamber that was constructed at Stutthof, and Bergmann personally pushed women into this, and within minutes they were killed. As the end of the Second World War came around, the Allies learned about her crimes and she became a very wanted woman. Stutthof, as it was shut down, saw the guard force flee, and Bergmann did the same, trying to escape. She was captured and she didn't get very far, and was brought to trial. At her trial she laughed throughout the proceedings, and often seemed more bothered about her hair or flirting with the guards inside of the courtroom. Her lawyers tried to argue that she was mentally ill, and that she was not sane, but the courtroom had other judgments on this. She did not help herself, and did not ask for forgiveness, and she never showed any remorse. When the death sentence was passed against her, she replied with, "Life is really a great pleasure, and pleasure, as a rule, does not last long." On the 4th of July 1946, in front of a huge crowd of around 20,000 people, Jenny Wanda Bergmann was hanged on a huge gallows on Biskupia Gorka Hill in Gdansk. She was the first of many that day who were executed, and a noose was placed around her neck, and she was slowly left strangling to death. Her body swayed in the breeze for some time, and people even tried to tear pieces of fabric off her dress to keep as a souvenir. Herta Bothe. Known as the sadist of Stutthof, Herta Bothe was a beast of a woman. She stood at over 6 feet 3 tall, and she was a virulent member of the Nazi Party. As a teenager she attended the youth groups such as the League of German Maidens, and in 1942 she became a camp guard inside of Ravensbrück concentration camp. She trained there like Irma Grese, and was then sent to work inside of Stutthof camp like Jenny Wanda Bergmann. She brutally beat many prisoners and gained her infamous nickname, and she would later admit to striking inmates with her hands for breaking the rules, and she maintained that she never killed anyone. Some victims later testified that Herta Bothe beat a Jewish woman to death armed with a wooden block, and another inmate said he saw her shoot 2 prisoners. This man claimed, "I saw several very weak prisoners carrying a food container from the kitchen block. As it was filled, it was very heavy. The women could not stand the weight and put it down to rest. At that moment I saw Bothe shoot at the 2 prisoners with her pistol. They fell down, but I cannot say if they were dead or wounded, but at the time they were very weak, thin and undernourished. I have no doubt that they died." After working at Stutthof, Bothe moved on to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, and this site was in a terrible way when she got there. Thousands were dying every month from disease at the camp, and Bothe did very little to improve things, and she did lots to make things much worse. She was involved after the liberation in the cleanup of 13,000 unburied bodies all around Belsen, and she later complained about doing this. She said that the bodies were so rotten that some of the arms and legs of the victims tore away when they were moved, and even complained about the fact some of the bodies gave her back pain when she had to move them into a mass grave. She was seen at trial as a ruthless overseer, but there was a problem with the evidence that was given. It was one person's word against hers, and she had not worked also at Auschwitz, unlike Irma Grese, and was actually seen somehow as a lesser offender. Because of this, Bothe was spared the death sentence and the hangman's noose, even though, on reflection, she should probably have been sent to the gallows. She served only 6 years of a 10-year sentence, and after her release she returned to German life. Some of her final words, which she gave during an interview about her work inside of the camp, chillingly said, "Did I make a mistake? No. The mistake was that it was a concentration camp, but I had to go to it. Otherwise, I would have been put into it myself. That was my mistake." She died in 2000 at the age of 79. Maria Mandel. Maria Mandel was one of the most notorious female guards of the Nazi concentration camp system. Born in 1912 in Austria, She initially worked as a weaver before joining the SS in 1938, shortly after the Anschluss brought Austria under Nazi control. She was assigned to the Ravensbrück women's camp, where her brutality quickly earned her a reputation. Mandel proved so ruthless that she was promoted to senior positions, eventually becoming one of the highest-ranking women in the camp hierarchy. In 1942, she was transferred to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where she became head of the women's camp. Known as the Beast of Auschwitz, Mandel exercised authority over thousands of female prisoners. She controlled selections on the ramp, deciding who would be sent to forced labour and who would be sent directly to the gas chambers. Survivors later record her cruelty, often describing how she appeared almost indifferent whilst condemning people, especially women and children, to death. Mandel was infamous for her involvement in beatings, torture and sadistic punishments. She frequently carried a whip and struck prisoners without provocation. She also took part in executions and sanctioned severe collective punishment for minor infractions of the rules. One of the darkest aspects of her role was her participation in selections of children for medical experiments and extermination, where her decisions directly contributed to countless deaths. Despite her brutality, Mandel also organised a women's camp orchestra. This ensemble, made up of imprisoned musicians, was forced to play while prisoners marched to and from their work details or to executions. Survivors testified that Mandel enjoyed the music and used it to create a grotesque veneer of normality within an environment of death and suffering. By the end of the war, it is estimated that Mandel bore responsibility for the deaths of over 500,000 prisoners. As the Red Army advanced in 1944, she fled Auschwitz and was transferred back to Ravensbrück, where she continued her role in oppressing prisoners until Germany's defeat. After the war, Mandel was captured by American forces in August 1945 and was later extradited to Poland. She stood trial in Krakow in 1947 during the Auschwitz trials, where numerous survivors gave evidence of her crimes. Found guilty of crimes against humanity, she was sentenced to death. On January 24, 1948, Maria Mandel was executed by hanging. Her legacy remains one of cruelty and callousness, remembered as one of the most infamous women to serve the Nazi regime within the concentration camp system. Elisabeth Volkenrath. Elisabeth Volkenrath was one of the most infamous female guards to serve in the Nazi concentration camps during the Second World War. Born in 1919 in Schönau an der Katzbach in Germany, she trained as a hairdresser before joining the SS camp service. Like many young women who became camp guards, she had no prior background in policing or military work, yet she quickly rose within the ranks of the Women's SS Auxiliary, proving herself both loyal to the regime and ruthless in her duties. Volkenrath began her work in 1941 at Ravensbrück, the main camp for women, where she trained under seasoned female warders. At Ravensbrück, she learned the system of terror that governed camp life, strict discipline, arbitrary punishments, and total authority over prisoners. In 1942, she was transferred to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where she became deeply involved in the extermination process. At Auschwitz, she served as an Oberaufseherin, a senior overseer, one of the highest positions a woman could hold in the camp's hierarchy. Her role meant direct supervision over thousands of women prisoners and over other female guards. At Birkenau, Volkenrath was present during selections on the ramp, where new arrivals were divided between those deemed fit for labour and those sent directly to the gas chambers. Survivors later testified that she carried out these selections without hesitation or mercy, condemning countless women and children to their deaths. She was also notorious for her cruelty in daily camp life. Prisoners record her overseeing brutal roll calls, beatings and punishments. Many described her as a cold, fanatical and unwavering Nazi, committed to enforcing SS policies of terror. In late 1944, as the Soviet advance forced the evacuation of Auschwitz, Volkenrath was transferred to Bergen-Belsen. There she became the chief female supervisor, responsible for the women's compound. Conditions in Belsen were catastrophic. Starvation, overcrowding and disease killed tens of thousands of inmates in the final months of the war. Though supplies were scarce, Volkenrath enforced strict discipline and continued the SS regime of abuse. Her position made her complicit in the catastrophic suffering and deaths of thousands of prisoners. After the liberation of Bergen-Belsen in April 1945, Volkenrath was arrested by British forces and was put on trial during the Belsen trials. Numerous survivors testified against her, recounting her role in selections, her cruelty and her responsibility as a senior overseer. She was convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity. On December 13, 1945, she was executed by hanging at Hamlin Prison. Volkenrath's career exemplifies the critical role played by female guards in the Nazi system of oppression and mass murder, demonstrating how ordinary women became perpetrators of extraordinary crimes.